There is no one path to greatness. But there are things all greats have in common. Their name as shorthand, their plays as textbooks, a story that inspires more stories in its wake. Only then will greatness be immortalized in our minds. And only now, greatness is immortalized in our history.
But not this guy. Now, I know that sounds insane, but stick around and hear me out. I promise it'll all make sense in a minute or two. Back in January, Riot Games announced in a blog post that they'll be introducing the equivalent of a Hall of Fame for competitive league, the LOL Esports Hall of Legends in 2024.
And after months of speculation, Faker has been announced as the very first inductee.
Now, before I continue, I want to stress that there is no player more deserving of a spot in the Hall of Fame than Faker. He's the undisputed GOAT, and no one else even comes close. So why don't I think he should be the first player inducted? Well, a more accurate title for this video would actually be why Faker shouldn't be the first player inducted in the Hall of Fame, because he's still playing and you can't let active players in the Hall of Fame. But that's not how YouTube works, so don't hate the player, hate the game. The point is, I believe that active players should not be able to be inducted into the Hall of Legends because doing so would hurt the Hall's credibility and set a bad precedent for the future. A Hall of Fame case should be based on all the facts, someone's story in full, not just a moment in time or hitting some arbitrary threshold of accolades. I thought this would be a pretty uncontroversial take because this is how like every other sports Hall of Fame works, but when a tweet I made after the announcement sharing this sentiment got a bit of traction, it made me realize that a lot of league fans who don't follow traditional sports just aren't familiar with the Hall of Fame model. So I figured I'd make a video explaining how it works, why letting in active players hurts its credibility, and who I think should be inducted in the first class, if not Faker. Also, for the record, I'll be using the Halls of Fame from the Big Four American sports for my examples in this video because I'm American. Sorry. Let's start with the basics. What even is a Hall of Fame? What's it for? Traditionally, a Hall of Fame is an institution that exists to honor legends of a game, both the greatest players of all time as well as people who have made outstanding contributions to a particular sport. They induct a few players each year, and induction should be the greatest honor a player of the sport can receive. Now, the reason Hall of Fames work and why they're respected is because the whole system operates on prestige. That prestige is held up by two pillars: credibility and exclusivity. Starting with credibility, fans, journalists, and players alike have to believe that everyone who makes it into the Hall of Fame deserves to be there. The process for admission is exhaustive, and the selection is done by an independent committee of experts, usually members of the media. Moving on to exclusivity, it's pretty simple. It has to be hard to get into the Hall of Fame. How hard? Since it was founded in 1876, it's been estimated that around 20,000 people have played Major League Baseball. Of that, just 270 players have been inducted into the Hall of Fame. That's a hair under 1.5%. The NFL's rate is also about 1.5%, while the NBA and NHL let in about 3% and 4% respectively. That's a pretty elite club. So how do you get in? The criteria is pretty simple across all four of these leagues. You must have competed in the league, and you must have been retired for a certain amount of time, either 3 years in the case of the NHL and NBA, or 5 for the NFL and MLB. Baseball also says you must have played at least 10 seasons, but that's about as restrictive as it gets. Exact methods for selection differ from hall to hall, but the one common factor is that you have to have been retired for some amount of time. Now, that's not to say that the way traditional sports do things is perfect and we should imitate them exactly. Lord knows we've learned that the hard way in esports these last few years. Like many other voting systems in America, they can be frustrating, confusing, inconsistent, and full of loopholes. There is always controversy about both who and how many people get in. Some say the Basketball Hall of Fame lets in too many people. Others say the MLB Hall of Fame is too exclusive. Some say that you need to accumulate a certain number of stats to get in. Others say that the eye test is the only thing that matters. Striking a balance is an impossible task because ultimately it's a subjective exercise.
But overall, I think that the purpose of a Hall of Fame, creating a place to honor the careers of past legends, is a noble one that traditional sports got right, even if the execution isn't always perfect. And as long as the Hall of Legends is called a Hall of Fame by Riot, which it has been multiple times, it should hold true to that same purpose.
So why muddy the waters even further by allowing active players into the Hall of Fame? It only creates problems, and being able to look at someone's career in full is one of the few controllable factors that exists across eras for a sport. Not having the retirement requirement damages the credibility of the Hall of Fame because it introduces an unequal standard. It allows for a situation where people can be inducted at different points in their career before their story is complete. Even though Faker's case is ironclad, that opens the door for someone in the future without as good of a case making it in under questionable circumstances.
It creates an idea that the Hall of Fame is something that someone gets into once they win enough trophies instead of an honor given to the very best when their careers are finished, and it turns Faker into more of a measuring stick for someone else's accomplishments, taking the focus off of his actual legacy.
What if, instead of 2024, Riot introduced the Hall of Legends in 2018? What if, like the NFL, they vote on inductees the day before the World Championship? What if, on the eve of his third straight Worlds appearance with a chance to repeat, they induct Crown? And at the time, why not? He played a key part in ending the SKT dynasty. Sure, the Malzahar pick wasn't the most stylish, but the horrors of Ardent Censor are fresh in everyone's minds. Plus, he went toe-to-toe with Faker in 2016, just 1 year before. And now he and the newly rebranded Gen G have made another run through the gauntlet like we've seen them do so many times before, with a chance to start a dynasty of their own. But there's just one problem. The voters don't know that Gen G are about to become the first and only Korean team to ever fail to make it out of groups. They don't know that Crown is going to implode and spend the next 2 years languishing in the basement of the LCS. They don't know that he'll be kicked from CLG halfway through 2020 and go out with a whimper after failing to revive his career in LCK Challengers. That would be a disaster and really hurt the legitimacy of the Hall of Fame. Looking at Crown's legacy back then, it would be impossible to imagine that he would fall off so completely so fast. But if a vote were held today, I think he wouldn't stand a chance of getting in. Now, you might be saying they wouldn't induct Crown in 2018. That's the ultimate nightmare scenario. And you're right, they probably wouldn't. But they could. And that's the problem. Saying that Crown wouldn't get in is missing the point, because it shouldn't be possible for a player like Crown to get into the Hall of Fame in the first place before their career is done and then fall off a cliff. This sort of thing happens in traditional sports as well. This Crown hypothetical reminds me a lot of Joe Namath, who won Super Bowl III with the Jets. He's near the top of pretty much all the lists of the most fraudulent NFL Hall of Famers of all time. He was mediocre at the beginning of his career, won the Super Bowl, and then faded into irrelevance. So even in a system where you look at a player's full career, it's still sometimes possible for questionable names to slip through the cracks. Want a more recent example? What about Zeka? He didn't win a single best of 5 in his whole career before DRX's Miracle Run, and then turned in what may go down as the single greatest tournament performance ever. What if he just never wins an LCK title or goes back to Worlds? Does he deserve to make it in? There's no way to know until he plays the rest of his career, but in a world where you can induct someone while they're still playing after one great tournament performance, maybe he does get in, and maybe he turns out to be a Crown. As much as I hate to use this phrase, it's a slippery slope. Now, there are a few common arguments for Faker's inclusion that I've seen online, and I want to refute them here. Number one is that Faker needs to be first because he's the best. And to that I say, a Hall of Fame is a collective. It is not a tier list. There shouldn't be any extra prestige for being the first inductee. Someone in the Hall that played in 2012 and someone who plays in 2042 are in the same club regardless of era. It's the fans' job to argue who's the best in the court of public opinion. Now, I do think that the blog post unnecessarily stoked this fire by implying that the first inductee would be put on some sort of pedestal, but no Hall of Fame ever inducts just one member first. There's always an opening class of a few players, and inductees aren't ranked in relation to one another. They're all Hall of Famers. And if we establish that we're putting people in the Hall of Fame on a list, does that mean that the second best player of all time has to be inducted second, the third best third, and so on? Because that gets really hard to pin down really fast. And honestly, why can't we just be patient? We all know he's getting in, so why does Faker need to be in the Hall of Fame right now? There's actually a term for people like Faker who are locked in for the Hall of Fame in traditional sports. It's called a first ballot Hall of Famer, someone who's still playing but will definitely make it into the Hall of Fame the second they're eligible. There are plenty of players like Ruler, Rookie, Uzi, Deft, Xiaohu, The Shy, and even Caps who would probably be first ballot Hall of Famers, but they're still writing their stories. No one was saying to rush Tom Brady into the Hall of Fame while he was still playing, even though everyone knew he was the GOAT years before his retirement. So I'd like to plead for a little patience from my fellow Zoomers. The second argument is that Faker is the exception, that he's so good and so important that he deserves to be able to break the rules. And to be honest, I can actually kind of get behind this one a little bit. Faker is unquestionably the greatest of all time, and if the committee comes out tomorrow and says, Faker is so good, we'll induct him into the Hall while he's still playing and everyone else is going to have to be retired. I think that's fine. But once again, why is that necessary? We all know he's going to end up here. And while I personally don't think it's likely that anyone will ever challenge Faker, it's still possible. You never think someone can be the GOAT until it happens. Look at Formula One. Nobody thought that anyone could challenge Michael Schumacher's legacy until Lewis Hamilton started winning everything with Mercedes. And just when it looked like Hamilton was unstoppable, Max Verstappen came around and now he looks unbeatable. So if Faker's so good that he deserves to be able to break the rules, and even if he has a world championship or two left in him, what if some future prodigy comes along and wins, say, 7? It's unlikely, but once again, this issue can be avoided entirely if you simply say that no one is above the law and Faker's gotta wait his turn like everyone else. And if you want to honor Faker, you should just name the world's MVP trophy after him or something, like the Lombardi Trophy in the NFL. All right, so you might be saying, Manny, you've complained a lot. We get it, Faker shouldn't be first for procedural reasons, but what should the procedure actually be? And that's a fair question. They haven't released any info on eligibility requirements yet, so I'm gonna submit my own ballot under my own set of rules. How many players? I'm gonna go with 10, that's 2 full teams. You'd obviously induct fewer than that every year going forward, maybe 3 a year, but 10 is a nice round number for the first class to establish things. Base qualifications are pretty simple. You must have been an active pro player and you must be retired. The question is, how long should you have to be retired for? I've seen a couple different ideas floating around online. Some say it should be instant, others say it should be 3 years. For me, I'd have to say 2 years sounds reasonable. It gives enough time to let things settle and to get the full picture of someone's career while also accounting for players pulling a double lift and unretiring, or maybe attending mandatory military service in South Korea before returning to pro play. How do you decide on who gets in? Different factors matter differently to different people, but the general criteria is some combination of accolades, so how many titles, MVPs, etc. they have, longevity, their impact on the game as a whole, statistics, and of course the infamous eye test, or how good a player looks in-game and how dominant they were relative to their peers. For me, I'd have to go impact on the game, eye test, accolades, longevity, statistics. But no order of these factors is wrong, except for maybe having statistics at the top. So with all that out of the way, in no particular order, here are my 10 votes for the first class of the LOL Esports Hall of Legends. First up, it's Mad Life, for creating the support role as we know it today and coining his iconic Mad Life hook predictions. Before Mad Life, supports were ward bots. After Mad Life, they became dynamic playmakers who could carry games. Even though he never won anything significant, he walked so that Carria, and really every other support player since, could run. His impact on the role has been immeasurable, even outside of competitive play, as he did a lot to popularize Thresh. He was also a human highlight reel. Go back and check out those montages. A lot of those hooks still hold up today.
On the run, there's a flash. Mad through the wall! How does he hit every single one? How is that possible?
Second up, we have Diamond Prox, for similar reasons to Mad Life. He basically created modern jungling back in 2012, and he was the first pro to start counter jungling. He was the engine behind the legendary Moscow 5 roster, who were arguably the best team in the world across all of Season 2. He continued that dominance for many years and would probably have an even better legacy if not for that roster's well-known trouble getting visas to compete in Germany. But even after being effectively forced out of the LEC, he dominated the LCL with Gambit for many years and was just one game away from going to groups in Worlds 2018 by beating that C9 roster that made semis. While Mad Life revolutionized the support role, Mata modernized it, helping pioneer the strategy of the support and jungle roaming together and making plays around vision across the map. He was the brains of 2014 Samsung White, who had probably the most dominant Worlds run of all time, and was also a strong mechanical player, making many deep runs at MSI and Worlds over the years, winning championships in both the LCK and LPL, which is something not many players have done. This one's pretty obvious. Xpeke is the man behind, well, the Xpeke, what I believe is the single most viewed play in League of Legends history. Even today, almost 8 years after his retirement, if someone goes for a backdoor, people who never saw him play spam Xpeke in all chat. On top of that, he won Worlds in Freak's Basement, helped establish Fnatic as the LEC's original powerhouse, held his own against the best of the LCK and LPL on the international stage, and even founded his own org, Origin, and made one last run to the semifinals in 2015. Just don't ask him about playing ADC. Up next, I'm gonna go with Khan, one of the best carry top laners of all time with a distinct style. Khan's rise to prominence in 2017 helped define a shift away from tanks toward a more aggressive meta. Not only does he have 6 LCK titles to his name, but he's had many deep international runs. He finished runner-up at MSI 2018 and 2021, as well as top 4 in 2019. He also has a World Semis appearance with SKT, as well as that heartbreaking Game 5 loss in World Finals during his last dance with Damwon in 2021, where he was arguably their best player, pulling out picks like Graves, Yasuo, and even Lucian top. Till the very end of his career, Khan always played like Khan, and that's why we love him.
Canyon goes in for the damage, Khan comes in, couple more shots, a penta for Khan!
Most fans today probably don't know much about Wei Zhao since he retired in 2014, but in the same way that Diamond Prox pioneered jungle and Mad Life pioneered support, Wei Zhao pioneered AD carry as we know it today. He was just on a different level than any other ADC at the time. He was part of the first ever LPL powerhouse World Elite who won the legendary IPL 5 and contributed to the game's rise in China, paving the way for the many elite LPL AD carries of the future, and earning himself a spot in the LPL Hall of Fame back in 2020. The star of the legendary ROX Tigers that got so close so many times to overcoming SKT, Smeb was on the losing end of the 2015 World Finals and the 2016 World Semifinals, arguably the greatest series ever played. He also lost 3-2 in the quarterfinals to the eventual 2018 World Champions Invictus Gaming, but he was regarded as the best top laner in the world for several years, won 2 LCK regular season MVPs, was arguably Faker's greatest rival during the SKT dynasty, and went on to win more championships and become the franchise player for KT Rolster during their Super Team era. Aside from bringing the LPL its very first international title in a Riot tournament, Clearlove is one of the most dominant domestic players of all time and was named the second greatest LPL player ever by the LPL for their 10th anniversary last summer. Starting with his time on World Elite with Wei Zhao, he played in the LPL longer than anyone else and won 5 titles, all of which he won as the franchise player for EDG. He didn't finish below 4th place in the LPL regular season or playoffs from spring 2013 to summer 2018. Now that's consistency. Always the bridesmaid, never the bride. Prey took falling just short of winning Worlds to the next level. He qualified for Worlds 5 times, qualifying for the knockout stage each time, but also lost to the eventual champions every single time, including back-to-back losses to SKT at the height of their power in 2015 and 2016. He also finished runner-up at MSI 2018. But Prey was an incredibly strong, incredibly consistent player for a very long time and was a key piece on the ROX Tigers. He's the only player to win the LCK on 3 different teams, and his Ashe arrow against SKT in 2016 remains one of the greatest plays of all time. Rounding out the list is Flame, a player who had one of the most dominant absolute peaks in the history of the game. Despite having the term Flame Horizon named after him, he doesn't get much respect today because he never won a major tournament, and most fans never saw him play at his peak. When you think of plays named after players, they usually tend to get easier over time. For example, the Insect used to be so crazy that only the best of the best could pull it off occasionally, but now even silver players can do it reliably. The Flame Horizon is the only one of these plays I can think of that's actually gotten harder. So much harder that it had to be adapted away from its original meaning so pros could still do it. Fans today know a Flame Horizon as going up 100 CS on your lane opponent at any point in the game, but that's not a true Flame Horizon. When Flame did it, he would do it in the laning phase. The game back then was different than it is today. He didn't just get 1 kill, swap to a side lane, and then AFK farm for 30 minutes. This was true 1v1 domination. Today we see players go up 30, maybe 40 CS in lane, and it's a slaughter. Imagine going up 100, and imagine doing it so often that they had to come up with a name for it. That's how much better this guy was than literally everyone else. So there you have it, the 10 players I think should be the very first Hall of Legends class. I feel like I'm snubbing Score here, but he can always make it in next year. And even though Faker shouldn't technically qualify, I hope you can see there are plenty of other great candidates. Got a problem with my list? Let me know about it in the comments. Just remember, I'm not an actual voter. And that is why Faker should not be in the LoL Esports Hall of Fame. At least, not yet.